All right. Hi, Instagram. This is Dr. Marie Tuen. I'm a dating and relationship coach and the author of What is Compersion? Understanding Positive Empathy in Consensually Non-Monogamous Relationships. I will be joined today by my colleague Gwendolyn Watson, LMFT, who wrote an amazing guest blog post on my website, which is What is Compersion, and she titled it Compersion in Everyday Life, Finding Empathic Joy Beyond Polyamory. Sorry, I'm trying to show my screen here to show you where it's at and what it looks like. It is on whatiscompersion.com, and today she will be talking about that context outside of polyamory, which I think is so incredible and so beautiful to describe. Her writing is amazing. Hi, Gwendolyn.
Hi.
Hi. So good to see you.
So good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here and having this conversation with me. I am so excited.
Yeah. It's been a long journey to this point. We've been talking about this for a while, so it's really fun to have this come to essence, come to fruition.
Absolutely. And I'm just so grateful that you reached out to me on LinkedIn a few months ago to network and talk about our respective practices as coach and therapist. And when we talked about compersion, you generously offered, some stories of your experiencing compersion, but not in polyamory,
Mhm.
but in other relationships in your life. And I just found that so evocative and so well articulated and so touching that that's why I invited you to write a blog for my site, because I think that's so important when we're talking about compersion or positive empathy, wholeheartedly being in support of and participating in the joy and happiness of others, to realize that is not only a polyamorous phenomenon or emotion or ethic. I think
Yes.
it goes, beyond polyamory and into all of our relationships. So why don't you start with just introducing yourself and what you do in the world?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice in Petaluma and then throughout California. And my main focus is really relationships, whether I'm working with individuals to help understand what parts of their past are getting in their way of connection to improve their relationships or start new ones, or working with couples directly and figuring out, what is the tension, the static that's happening in their connection, and how can that shift or evolve if that's what's needed. So yeah, the concept of compersion, your work, I just love the way that you're bringing this conversation out there of intentional relationships and really thinking about, people's needs and what they're wanting. And whenever there's work like that out there, I'm always drawn to the people who are pushing the conversation in the space around all the ways we can connect.
Thank you so much for that. I'm curious, like, when did you first encounter the word or the concept of compersion, and what did you think?
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of ties into my later story, actually. The
Mhm.
first time I learned about the word compersion was my own individual therapist. So when I was a client going through my divorce for my ex-husband, my ex-spouse, um, in that process, I was in session talking to her about, really like feeling happy for him as he was finding new partners. And he would tell me about like new exciting people that he had met, and seeing the joy on his face and seeing how some of the people he was meeting were just such a great fit for him in a way that I couldn't fit. Parts of my puzzle piece couldn't fit into into what he was needing in a relationship, and vice versa. And my therapist was like, oh, that's compersion. That's in polyamory people talk about compersion. And we were just chuckling that it was in the process of divorce and in the process of actually like having separate needs. And in the process of heartbreak, that full circle, I was coming across this term and seeing it in myself organically without knowing the term. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing that actually, like, yeah, experiencing compersion through that process of heartbreak and letting go
Mm,
of a prior iteration of your relationship
yeah.
with, someone who was your husband and then became your ex-husband, and through that letting go, you were able to kind of get on board with the new expressions of his romantic love.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it for me, compersion, that part of compersion was really about loving and accepting myself. Part of our divorce was my sexuality changed. We met quite young in our college years, and I started to really embrace my own change in my sexuality. And so, by really accepting and loving myself for what I was needing in a relationship, I was able to create that space to see, well, I can't meet some of the needs that he's wanting, and he can't meet some of the needs that I have, and therefore we're going to separate as an act of love. For us, we're both monogamous, and we definitely had a lot of questions from people around us saying, why don't you just stay married? You can just open it up, you can just figure it out. And
Mhm,
um,
mhm,
that wasn't a choice that was going to work for us in our own like organization.
mhm.
But yeah, it was that process of accepting myself, loving myself more deeply, that then I think helped enable me to feel genuine love for him as he was, as I was witnessing him fall in love with new people.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that is I think, such a gem, what you just expressed, like this idea of loving yourself so deeply that you can really attune to what is the new version of this relationship. And if it means a separation, like
Mm-hmm.
of the iteration of the relationship that can be an act of love. Separation
Mm-hmm.
as an act of love. I think that is, I mean, that's the ideal version of any, like breakup
Yeah.
or relationship transition. So thank you for putting words on that. And I think that is such a helpful North Star for anyone who is experiencing a relationship transition,
Mm-hmm.
which can be so triggering, and it can be so tempting to, see a separation as I did something bad, or you did something bad, or we did something bad and we failed, versus, oh my gosh, maybe we evolved into a new version of ourselves. And the loving thing to do is to transform the way we
Yeah.
relate.
Yeah. And it often starts that way with the shame of a breakup. And I would be skipping over if I said I went straight to
Mhm.
compersion and love and self-love. There was so much shame, and divorce has so much shame connected to it. There's such a culture of divorce being failure and divorce being
Right.
something that you've done wrong. um, so it was loving myself through that process of forgiving myself for not having the full responsibility of a relationship continuing, and then seeing through that I can still honor the relationship we had by being the person I want to be in our divorce, in our co-parenting, and then in now our blended family. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, we're a big blended family. He has a partner, I have a partner,
Mhm.
and I'm really proud of our relationship and what we're doing. So, all of the relationships. So it's a little ironic because we joke that we're not polyamorous, but I'm now in a blended family of four adults and we all love each other. And I'm like, this isn't that different than poly. It's like,
Yes. Oh.
yeah, I'm sure it's a Venn diagram of terms that someone could come up with and tell me what I am. But um, yeah, it's I have respect for the ways that people find love in polyamorous circles, because there's ways that I'm living a version of that, just in with monogamous relationships.
Well, it sounds like a non-mononormative
Yeah,
form of monogamy.
I knew you'd have the term.
Right. Like, and for those who are watching and don't know, mononormativity is kind of the assumption that monogamy should always be the only way to love, and that, if you love one person, it means you cannot love another. And it's a little bit like heteronormativity, the assumption that heterosexuality is the most morally superior or most natural way to express sexuality, and mononormativity is this idea that monogamy is the most natural. And I am on a quest to dismantle mononormativity, because I think, we should be able to love in various ways that suit us and the people that we are in relationship with. And I'm not on a quest to destroy monogamy, because I think monogamy is oftentimes, unfortunately, entered by a place of default because we're conditioned into it, or because we're afraid of what would happen if we went outside of it, so we can feel trapped in monogamy. But monogamy can also be this very conscious choice, this knowing that we have options, that we could be non-monogamous, and that could be okay and not shameful, and that could be beautiful, but we still feel like, oh, okay, actually what works for me is monogamy. And I can still have a very intentional love life or family life. Like there's an intentionality and there's a sense of freedom in that. So it sounds like you have designed a relationship ecosystem with, like what could be thought of as polyamorous values, or
Right.
non-normative values, but, monogamy has its place in that as a conscious choice.
Yeah. Yeah. That resonates.
Yeah, so that's beautiful. So there's, in your blog, you generously describe 3 life circumstances where you've experienced compersion. And one is about your ex-husband and your new blended family. And one is about your current monogamous partner and her love of learning French. So would you like to tell that story?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'm in a committed partnership and it's monogamous, and I really feel very seen and connected to this woman, and we have something really special together. And I was surprised that even with that commitment and that, like, there's no question about her love for me, I was surprised that that there was one night when we were hanging out and I was feeling really, the only way to describe it is kind of like prickly or kind of sassy. Like she was on the couch reading, studying French. When she commits to something, it's 100%. And she has committed for years to learning French fluently. Not for a job, not for anything, just because she's like, why wouldn't I learn French? I want to learn it. And it's not a hobby, it's 100%. And that evening, I came down from putting our kids to bed and wanted to connect with her. And she asked me a question about how to translate some French verb. And I was just like, oh, and I gave her like such an eye roll, such a side eye, like, why are you asking me about French? And she was like, kind of like, WTF? Like, why? What is this about French? And every time she came back from French class, I'd be like pouty and whatever.
Oh, wow.
And I basically my journey towards compersion was really taking accountability for jealousy and realizing like, oh shit, I'm jealous of French. I'm jealous of French. I'm threatened by French. I kind of like when she skips French class to hang out with me, and when she still goes to French class, even though it would really nice to hang out, like I feel kind of like she's, abandoned me. Like, all of these, like, I do a lot of parts work as a therapist, so it's all these internal parts, right? That like I had an awareness. I didn't actually fully believe in my core self, but they were still there, right? And I was just like, yeah, I'm really jealous of French and threatened by it too. And what I loved about that was like, we get jealous of non-humans, right? We get jealous of things. And how often in past relationships was I jealous of the work relationships, or like someone's new pursuit of a new career, and just feeling like time scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I basically confessed to her. I was like, I'm really jealous of French. And she was like, yeah, I know. It's so obvious. Like partners can usually tell when we're jealous, right? But we just pretend we're not.
Right.
Um,
Mhm.
so it was just this process of realizing like, why am I feeling this scarcity, like this competition with an activity with, even in a monogamous relationship, there's a way that jealousy is landing and being sprouting up outside of a different partner, right? Like jealousy is a human emotion. It's going to show up whether you're polyamorous or monogamous. And
Yes.
so, yeah, right. But it's also like one of the shameful ones, right? As a therapist, it's also the ones that people pretend like, oh, it's not that I'm jealous, right? All the disclaimers. I'm not jealous, but, and you're like, sounds a little jealous.
I'm just sad.
Yeah. So I confessed my jealousy, and for Christmas, kind of as a like humble pie moment, I bought her this set of like flashcards that could like go into a device that spoke the accent back, and it was totally my like, yeah, I know. But part two that didn't go in the blog was last night.
Ooh.
I noticed jealousy towards our cat.
Your cat? What?
She was like playing with our cat and so focused in it. And again, I was pouting and I was like, why am I acting like this? And she was like, do you have catacy? And I was like, what? And she's like, cat jealousy. And I was like, yep, okay. So it's just that like, oh, here it is again. And how do I find compersion for her relationship with our cat and not feel again that like tug of war of I want to be center of attention, right? Which there's that the wounded part, the young child part who came from a big family who gets activated and it comes up. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can totally imagine that, like that cuddly relationship with an animal just seeming like, well, don't you want to just cuddle me instead? And
And then like the other person being like, really, like you're jealous of our cat? And it's like that's what the more that I try to cultivate compersion, the
Mhm.
more I embrace that it's like really a process of understanding jealousy, of
Mhm.
accepting it as part of the human experience, and not repressing it, like taking accountability, owning it, and seeing, what part of this jealousy is speaking to a core need, right? And so for me, who's as someone who's monogamous, if she was, flirting or texting with someone, it would be like, oh, I'm feeling jealous because of a core relationship need. So I'm going to speak to that. But there's other times when I'm like, I'm feeling jealous, and it's actually more about my internal stuff. It's not about a betrayal or a rupture within our monogamy agreement, which I love. If you know Tammy Nelson, she talks about monogamy agreements and how like really just understand like what is your monogamy, even if that includes monogamish or whatever.
Right.
So I'm like, what is it part of our monogamy agreement, or is this jealousy actually a reflection of my own wounds that I'm just projecting on her and saying she's making me jealous? And it's like, no, maybe I just, have to take that to therapy.
Uh-huh. Yes, yes. And just kind of see it for what it is as a mirror,
Yes.
the mirror of relationships where we all carry those insecurities. Like, are we enough? Are we lovable? Are we, do people care about us? And of course, when we're getting into intimate relationships, no matter what the structure is, we will have those parts of us reflected and brought back to our attention. And
Yeah.
what a gift at some level, even though it's painful and can be annoying and disruptive. But what a gift that we have that mirror to reflect those parts of us that need extra love, extra self-soothing,
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah, exactly.
There's actually a song in French. I'm from Quebec originally, so my first language is French, and there's all this beautiful music. But one of my favorite bands from Quebec, it's called Beau Dommage, and there's a song that's called Simply Jealous. And it is basically like this very tender expression of I'm not a bad guy. I'm not someone who would hurt, an
Mhm.
ant. I'm such
Yeah.
a tender-hearted person, and yet I'm jealous of the air that touches your body. I'm jealous of the people who just like look at you and might make eye contact with you.
Ooh.
I'm jealous of the odors that you smell on your way, and I'm jealous of, the flowers that you pick. Like it's just this such a beautiful raw expression of when we're so in love and yet where our heart feels so vulnerable.
Mhm.
It's sometimes very natural to just feel like everything could be a threat to that valued
Mhm.
relationship. We're over vigilant or hyper vigilant to any sense of threat to that beautiful love because it feels so tender and vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that example because I think it also brings up the fact that jealousy is a spectrum. And I think why I had my own resistance towards seeing jealousy in myself is because as a therapist over the years in my work, I've heard about and I've witnessed when jealousy is really at an extreme, a righteous jealousy, where
Mm,
someone might say, because I feel jealous, I am entitled to acting in a certain way or controlling a certain person in relationship.
mm,
And I guess I just want to name that here, that of course, as we're talking about jealousy, that's not what we're talking about or condoning. We're trying to make space for folks who notice the vibrations of jealousy internally, to offer compassion, curiosity, exploration, versus like a permission to act out on jealousy, right? But there's only like two extremes in our society. It's the jealousy that's violent and of course like needs support and needs to be avoided in relationship, or the purely happy and committed in a very specific relationship structure with no jealousy and no side eyes, right? And it's really, I like this exploration of compersion is giving permission in my mind to folks who feel really, really pressure to perform and be stuck in that way,
mhm,
and just notice that jealousy is a human emotion. That doesn't make you an abusive or controlling person to feel jealous. It's you have the ability to explore it, to name it, to dialogue about it in relationship, and that's actually what's healthy, right?
mhm.
That's creating connection and accountability. And of course, like even with my partner, I'm like, yeah, I'm jealous of French, and I'm so happy you're going. Like I'm not telling her what to do. I'm just like,
Oh,
I'm gonna sit with my jealousy and I'm gonna watch Netflix and tell myself I should probably get my own hobby while I wait for her to come home.
oh no. Uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
it's what we do with jealousy, right?
Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
exactly. And thank you for naming that distinction and that spectrum potentially from a very kind of like self-responsible, tender-hearted, vulnerable jealousy to, like versus a weaponized
exactly.
jealousy or an entitled or a righteous jealousy, like you said, where we give ourselves sometimes permission to turn that emotion against ourselves or against the person we
Mm-hmm.
love.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can just kind of take out the shame from it and actually give ourselves permission to express that jealousy from a tender, vulnerable place, I actually think that can be an act of love
Mm-hmm.
towards ourselves and our partner to just give ourselves that permission and that safety to be tender-hearted about it and just have it be an expression of tenderness and love and trust. Like, hey, I trust you to hold that emotion with me and, like create some healing in that place. And I don't want to restrict your freedom and your blossoming and your expansion.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's so beautiful. Oh, and I am so eager to hear you talk about your second story, which I think is so, oh my gosh, again, so evocative and so relatable. Even though I don't have
Mm-hmm.
children, your second story in the blog is about your
Mm-hmm.
son and witnessing a sports game
Yes.
and then expanding your heart and your compersion towards other kids. I would love to hear you
Yeah.
speak to that.
Yeah. So I I was Saturday basketball practice. Actually, I think it was a game, basketball game with my son, who, has my genes, which means like we love sports, but we aren't always extremely athletic. I was definitely like an anxious athlete. So I'd be like anxiously watching, when I was on the court. And he has now he's like, once he gets confident, he goes the other direction. But in this story and in that moment, he's kind of a lean back, like a hold back and watch. And as there always are on sports teams, there was this kid who was just like amazing, right? Clear, like he was like, I think he shot like a 3-pointer, and I'm like, this is like second grade. Come on. It's just like, so, he's like swooshing and just like kind of just like ruling the court. And, my son might get the ball like once and then pass it to him because he knows this other kid is going to make the basket.
Yeah.
And I was on the sidelines and like noticed that I was like the opposite, I guess kind of like a dance bomb. I was like just like in my head, like, why would everyone be passing to that kid? Like this is supposed to be teaching people how to play basketball, and this is unfair. Like my kid needs the ball more, and like people should just give him a chance. And like this is, and like every time people be like, yeah, like that kid got the basket. I'm like, oh, this is like really unfair, And it was all in my head. Like I have learned in my adult life how to filter, right? But my head is still very creative, very bad, all my parts. So I was like, wow, like, dude, like I'm at a basketball game and I'm salty. Like I am really salty. And I am being that basketball mom who like part of me like wanted to talk to the coach afterwards,
Right. I
get him more ball time. And I had to pause and realize like, what is going on for me? Like, what is this? What is this fear of someone else's kid shining? Right? What is this sense of competition? And we talked about jealousy, but I think also within compersion is noticing when we have a sense of competition and a fear of losing something. And in this situation, I had this sense of competition that was purely like on behalf of my son. It was like projected competition. My son was fine. He loved the game. He thought he had a great time, right?
Yeah.
So I went back to the next game and I was kind of like, I really need to not have this mindset of being scared of some other kid getting the limelight and getting validation, and see that like it's beautiful when someone else's kid is shining. That kid might not shine in other areas of school or relationships, like he's shining. And I think as a therapist and as a mom who wants to be open-hearted, I can stretch myself to really celebrate and love this kid's accomplishments, even though he's not my kid. I'm not even friends with his parents. Like I barely know his name, right? But I was jealous of him.
Right.
And so
the threat.
Yeah, the threat. Exactly. The threat of somehow like the scarcity of admiration, was going to go all towards him. And that meant I had to be a mama bear and make sure my kid got seen. And it's like, that's not true, right? That's not really what I believe, but well, a part of me did. Yeah. And so the next game I was like, I'm just going to go all in. Like, I am just going to cheer on this kid because he's having a moment to shine. And I want to kind of cultivate, a version of compersion. I don't know, like, what do we call it? In courtside compersion is what it said on the blog. And so I was like cheering. I learned his name. I was yelling his name like, yeah, you got it. Go, go, go. And I witnessed that my son was doing the same. Like he was giving him high fives and he was like, oh, did you see that to me, like, did you see that basket? And I just realized, like, as a parent, my kids are going to notice if I am competitive or have a scarcity mindset or jealous or like kind of instilling these values in them versus if I'm really celebrating everyone's wins, and I think the word that I used, because compersion doesn't really fit as much, but like collective empathy. Like if I model collective empathy of someone else having a beautiful day, someone else shining is something for us all to celebrate in a more collectivist mindset instead of an individualist mindset. Um, my kids pick up on that. And ultimately, that is what I want them to aspire to. I want them to learn. I want them to like integrate, because there's so much from capitalism to, you name it,
Yes.
that really instills in us, and especially raising two sons, like instills in my mind, it's the patriarchy instilling in boys that like, you're only worthy if you're on top. You're only worth, like there is a hierarchy and you have to aspire to that. And so therefore you have to be afraid of other people one-upping you. Um, and I just started realizing as a parent, I want to embrace the opposite and teach them the opposite.
Oh, that is everything. I'm like, oh wow. If the whole world could be hearing you right now and taking that in, I mean, it
Yeah.
is kind of an antidote to that tribalism or tribalistic, like philosophy of there's a totem pole and people who are either me or in my bloodline need to prevail and need to dominate, and we don't care about others outside of our bloodline. Like there's something so that can be so visceral about that. We want to protect our own tribe.
Yeah.
And yet, where has that led us? Like if we look at the news, it's not pretty.
Yeah.
We're actually not seeing the circle of family broadly enough for us to really make it as a species
Right.
and as a global community. And that's a real shame. And what you're talking about, I think, is the only antidote. You know, if we're taking that to a global level, it
Mm-hmm.
is really like, can we root for other people
Mm-hmm.
as well as our own bloodline or the people closest to
Yeah.
us? So that really, when I read that story, my heart just exploded. I was like, oh
Mm.
my, this is the solution. Like, preach.
Yeah. And I think one key part about that story is like the accountability of noticing what was in my head,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that, I guess, same as we talked, like there's a spectrum of the mama bear energy.
Mm-hmm.
And if there really was a situation, I'm thinking about like school resources, or like when moms are like really advocating for kids to get the right support and IEPs if they're neurodivergent, like that is coming from a place that is really identifying like when there's a disservice and when there's an unbalanced need.
Yeah.
And that's like a healthy place to bring up that energy of, hey, I'm not going to let my kid fall behind, and I want to make sure the school district and all these other people respect and understand that. But in the story that I shared, it was kind of like that energy was there, but it wasn't needed because it was a projection, it was a fantasy. And so I think that's part of what we're talking about too, is like pausing to notice, am I reacting to facts that are in front of me that I do want to fight some type of injustice or some type of betrayal or some type of, like misunderstanding?
Yeah.
Or is it my own insecurity, my own projection, my own parts, which are feeding me this story, but it's actually not what's happening right in front of me?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that
Exactly.
is the one to say, okay, let me cultivate compersion. Let me cultivate this collective empathy. Let me really hold myself accountable for the messages I want to put out in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. What a great distinction. Yes, because sometimes there are things that are unfair and we need to fight for people who are getting the short end of the stick and it's just not okay.
Mhm.
And when is it just unnecessary or just like a
Yeah.
reflex, like those parts that will consider, like, well, am I a victim in this situation no matter what is actually happening? So,
Mhm. Yeah.
yes. And by the way, plugging in another blog post that I just published from a kindergarten teacher who wrote
Yeah.
about teaching compersion to kids
Wow.
because there's so much competition,
Yeah.
at that young age. Like, who's going to be the line leader? Who's going
Hmm.
to, like win the, like the prize for the week, or, like, and how do kids start to celebrate the joy of others at a young age as a matter of like ingraining that habit that you don't have to always be the one winning or
Yeah.
always be the one at the top of that totem pole to be okay.
Mhm.
Like that's such deep, beautiful education to give to a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we've already talked about the third story in your blog, which is about your ex-husband, but I don't know if you wanted to share anything else about it,
Yeah.
because I know there might be people who are coming in now and maybe didn't catch the beginning of our conversation. So
Sure.
if you'd like to expand on anything in that circumstance, which I think is again so relatable and so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that just to expand on it further, that I shared that like in a lot of ways, our breakup, our divorce had that spirit of compersion built
Yeah.
in, that it was intentional and it was kind of having this, there's definitely the heartbreak, but it was this awareness of what couldn't exist within the relationship structure that we had, and out of a spirit of love for each other, how are we going to expand beyond.
Mhm.
But what has been really incredible about that kind of origin and that mindset from the beginning is that our partners that we've found have that same mindset, and even like my ex, when he was dating and would talk to me about different people he met, he would say like, well, the number one thing that matters for me is that someone embraces, this story, this situation, and especially since he's heterosexual, he was dating women, still that understanding and awareness of someone still being open-minded, being queer friendly, maybe even being queer, but just having that like expansiveness of, we're a blended family. We're not going to see me as the ex-wife as like, the villain. Like it's like we're going to have that mindset.
Mhm.
And his partner is an incredible woman who, makes soup for me when I'm sick, like checks in on me, like shares photos of our kid. We're always sharing photos back and forth, gave me like the most amazing Christmas presents, and really has that spirit of genuine love for me and vice versa. And my partner, our very first Christmas after being divorced, me and my partner were together, and my ex invited me and my partner over for Christmas morning
Yeah.
with his parents, my ex in-laws,
Yes.
and we all celebrated Christmas together. And she was like, "Is this real? Like really?" And he had presents for her, had like he put together a stocking for her, and I'm like, "Yeah, like that's kind of like so it's kind of this awareness of how compersion is like that intention really invited others to lean in and be in that place too. Even with, technically she's my ex-mother-in-law, but I think of her as my mother-in-law. We're still so close, and she's still like, when we see each other in the holidays and I'll bring the kids down to her house to meet up. It's kind of like, people, if you walk that path, people feel permission to join in and to do that and to voice that. My partner was like just so joyful and so happy when my ex found his current partner. She's like, I can see how in love he is. It's beautiful. And it was like, yeah, like, and I loved seeing her joy about his new partner. And so again, like,
Mhm.
what we named, that we're not a polyamorous, we're not a polycule, we're not a polyamorous group. We're very, very specifically two monogamous people with two monogamous people,
Mhm.
but there's still this embracing of collective empathy, of your wins I feel joy for, your losses, I'm hurting for you.
Mhm.
And because of that, it's like everyone feels permission to operate under those terms, and therefore it grows, right? People, you go above and beyond, you do more when there's that culture.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a culture. I love that. Creating a culture of empathy and a culture of compersion, for that matter,
Mhm.
where compersion begets compersion.
Yes.
When you feel like somebody actually celebrates your joy and your relationships, it is so much easier to celebrate theirs. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's this positive relational feedback loop that can happen, which actually I talk about in my book, like the sense of if you sense that everyone else has your best interest in mind, you want to have everyone else's best
Mm-hmm.
interest in mind, and it creates this sense of, okay, we're all on the same team here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
how beautiful. I feel like you could create workshops about like how to break up with compersion.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I know.
That's
Yeah. And I think that that's to go along that thread, breaking up with compersion. The truth is breakups are going to hurt no matter what, right?
mm,
And I think both of us, when we were going through our divorce, really embraced like, this is painful.
yeah,
There's no way to avoid this
right.
pain.
Yeah.
And in fact, making space for the pain that it was helped us access still that feeling of like we're on the same team and we want to support each other through it. And we don't want to fight about who gets what dishes and all of that. Like it's going to be painful. We don't need to add suffering on top. So it really is it as opposed to like we have to be happy through this.
Mm,
We're going to pretend we're happy. We're not going to make space for any pain or any upset, right? Which is like kind of I think sometimes like the pressure to have compersion or the pressure to break up in like a beautiful way.
yeah.
It's actually making space for the pain and then saying there's enough pain in this breakup. I don't want to add more suffering for me or for this person that I do love and I do respect. And I think that mentality is what makes space for compersion to ultimately come to be, where you're loving them for their joy because you've also witnessed their pain through the breakup, and vice versa. You know that the breakup is something that happened to the relationship versus something we did to each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is so true. That it can be such a pitfall, when we talk about compersion, to make it an orthodoxy,
Hmm.
something that you have to have, you have to show up with compersion no matter what, and then creating a spiritual bypass
Hmm.
and trying to just like pretend in like a toxic positivity way. Oh yeah, yeah, I'm so happy for you. And then you're bypassing the actual empathy, the actual tenderness, the actual connection with everything that's true for this other person
Hmm.
and for you.
Hmm.
And without that, then it's hard to really feel like you're participating in their emotional well-being, whether it's participating in their joy or their sadness.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for naming that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to wrap up by maybe like just like reading a quote from your blog.
Mm.
Is that okay? Because I think
Yeah.
your words are so delicious and
Thank
evocative.
you.
That's amazing. And I'd like to just read the conclusion, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So your conclusion is titled From Scarcity Mindset to Collective Compersion. And you say, in our world, the dominant culture focuses on gaining power and influence. Compersion encourages us to do the opposite. It's a mindset that relishes in the joy and gratitude of witnessing someone else's joy or achievements, even when they don't directly connect to our own aspirations and goals. Each of us can shift out of a competitive mindset when resources for attention and validation are scarce into one of abundance that sets aside anxieties about getting our own needs met. We can choose to believe in our own ability to name and fulfill our needs while maintaining the spaciousness to celebrate and rejoice in someone else's fulfillment. And finally, we don't need to open up our marriages or change our identities to practice compersion. Instead, we simply need to notice where our empathy and love can stretch and expand into a collective one. So, Dan, thank you so much
Yeah.
for these words. I feel like you're painting the possibility for a whole other reality and just so skillfully bridging the poly concept of compersion with something that we can all relate to, no matter what our relationship style is.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I've really enjoyed the invitation to think about compersion and how it shows up in my life. And yeah, I loved this conversation. It was a pleasure to be on Instagram Live with you.
Likewise, how fun. And where can people find you if they'd like to work with you as a therapist? Because I mean, since I've met you, I've been referring you. Sometimes people are, I'm a coach, so I'm not a licensed therapist, and sometimes people ask me for referral to a licensed therapist. So I've been spreading your name
Oh,
around
thank
because I just really
you. Yeah.
can feel and trust like how incredible you are. So if you want to talk a little bit about your work.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to work with me as a therapist, you can go to my website, www.gwendolynwatson.com. And I have free resources on there as well. And I just added a free resource of a newsletter to sign up for. I'm calling Couples Therapy for One, for those folks who, whether they're in a relationship or not, want relationship tips to kind of support that weekly kind of mindset shift, the meditation. So I put a Google Doc there to sign up, and I'm going to release that soon because couples therapy is expensive, and usually not everyone is ready for it. So I'm wanting to connect with folks at all points in the journey of their relationships.
That
Yeah.
sounds fascinating. And yes, now sometimes like our partner doesn't really want to go to therapy with us. So how
Mhm.
do you work on your relationship? Therapy is
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm Dr. Marie Tuin. I'm a dating and relationship coach. People can find me here on Instagram or marietuin.com. So, hope you all have a beautiful day, and thank you again so much, Gwendolyn, for joining me and contributing this beautiful blog. And everyone should go and read it. It's on whatiscompersion.com on their blog.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.